route for today. Thank you, I forgot about that. This will be recorded, so if you don't want your camera seen or anything like that, you can turn your cameras off. But if you're in this room, you're on the officer transition route, and we're starting kind of that series with myself with effective communication and knowledge transfer. So before we actually get into the meat and potatoes of this workshop, I just wanted to introduce myself so that you all know who's presenting for you. My name is Tyler Hern. I'm a life member of the Beta Nu chapter at Arkansas Tech University. I have a bachelor's degree in music education. I am currently a chapter visitation associate on the NLC, and my current day job is as an environmental science and chemistry teacher at a very small high school in Arkansas. That's what I do, pretty much all about me. I also have a cat who might make an appearance every once in a while, um, if you see her. So, for today, for this workshop, effective communication and knowledge transfer are two pretty big sectors that intertwine whenever we talk about the transfer of knowledge. We're going to first start with pillars of effective communication. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on effective communication. We all know that that can be a workshop in it of itself, but I will just go through some highlights of effective communication, some pillars that I believe are the standing pillars for effective communication moving forward, and then we'll link those into knowledge transfer. For me, knowledge transfer happens in three different parts. Before elections happen, during the elections, and after the elections are already done. Most of the time, a lot of our brains go to transition meetings right after elections, but there's a lot of knowledge transfer that we can get done way before elections even take place. So we're going to start off by looking at some pillars of effective communication and what that actually means. So for me, effective communication can be summed down to these kind of four pillars: be clear, be intentional, be understanding, and be kind. If you don't know who Brene Brown is, she's an amazing author person who has a lot about communication. And one of her things is clear is kind and unclear is unkind. You want to be as clear as possible in all of your communication, always, to make sure that you are being as kind as possible to anyone and everyone around you. My screen just messed up for a second. That also goes with the be kind when I think about communication, but we want to have clear intentions whenever we're communicating with anyone. Be intentional. For me, this goes to thinking about how your words come across to other people, especially in a chapter setting. Sometimes the things that we say may not come across exactly as we meant them in certain aspects. So always be intentional. Think about how what you are saying is coming across to everyone around you and what you are actually intending behind what you're saying. Be understanding. This is just for everything in life. Always be understanding to anyone, especially in chapter and with officer positions. We all come from a variety of backgrounds, and different information that we've gotten along the way can sway how we see things. So always be understanding of other people's situations, where they came from, their point of view in general, and always be willing to hear that with effective communication. And then lastly, be kind, especially in chapter. You are going to have random times where there might be drama or things like that going on. Always leave that at the door and greet everyone with kindness at all times. Treat people with the kindness that you would want to receive in communication. And this is not a presentation about conflict resolution, but always remember that in effective communication, you can always stop communication for the time being, take some time away from that situation, and then come back with a clear head to effectively communicate. Those are just some pillars of communication. Like I said, I'm not going to dive too deep in them because I really want to get to effective communication with knowledge transfer. So, how does that effective communication that we just talked about, those four kind of pillars, how does that actually apply to knowledge transfer? Well, first and foremost, when we're transferring knowledge, we want to be as accurate as possible about how the chapter is doing in certain events and any improvements that need to happen. We want to convey accurate information so that nobody's lost about anything that's going on in the chapter or in that office. And overall, this is going to help build and maintain the future of your chapter for years to come. We want to build the longevity of our chapter through knowledge transfer, and that stems from that effective communication, making sure we're as accurate as possible. So now we get to kind of the meat of this workshop, the things that we're actually going to dive into, like knowledge transfer. Like I said at the beginning, I kind of separate knowledge transfer into three different sections. The first one being before elections. Before elections is the time for you to take notes and really process everything that's happening through documentation. We're going to look at a bunch of different ways to document that. And then we're going to move on to during elections. How are your chapter's elections actually structured? How could they be better structured to be conducive for knowledge transfer? Is there a way that we can still have knowledge transfer happening during our elections? And then we're going to talk about after elections, transition meetings, final reports, everything that we think of when we actually think of transitioning from one officer to the next. As a preface, everything that I'm going to talk about with knowledge transfer is a suggestion. They're just things that I have seen in the past that have worked really well or might benefit your chapter going forward. They are in no way things that you absolutely have to do as an officer or as a chapter. You don't have to completely change your entire election process just because someone gave a workshop saying that there might be this way to do it. Just know that it's all suggestions, stuff that you can try to make sure that the knowledge is transferring as seamlessly as possible. So, for before elections, documentation is the most important thing. That's why I wrote it 3 times. You need to document everything that is possibly happening. So, as an officer, you want to make sure that everything that you do in that office, whether it's secretary, whether it's treasurer, whether it's president, everything that you are doing in that office is being written down somewhere. You have a great space to do this if you're not using Google Drive already, which hopefully all the chapters should be using Google Drive. But if you're not using Google Drive is a great place to categorize everything that you're doing by folders, make sure it's all written down somewhere. That way, anybody who comes into the chapter can access those files. Documentation is super important because it helps us have accurate information and lets us know what the chapter has done in the past. Now, a lot of chapters just stop with writing stuff down. And that's great. We want to make sure everything is documented, but we also want to take that a step further to analyzing what we've done and what we can change about it. When I was a chapter member, we used something called an event Google form. You by no means have to use this, but it is a very helpful thing to look back at your events and know what worked and what didn't. So it's just a Google form that can easily help you know what the event was, know what you needed for it, and know how it can improve for the future. I'm going to exit out of this presentation real fast and go to kind of a template of that Google form. Can everybody see the Google form? Or did my screen not move to it? You did? Okay, cool. I saw a head nod, so I'll take it. So this is just a template that I made real fast about an after event Google form. It is in no way the one that you have to use if you want to use one. You can make your own for your chapter, but I made it in a very specific way. So it's an after event form. So if you are the treasurer, for example, that's the one I always go to as an example because fundraisers are an easy example to use. If I was a treasurer, after my fundraiser happened, I would go to this form in our Google Drive and I would start filling it out. So I would say the school year, type of the event, I just listed some types of events. So fundraiser, service event, a membership recruitment event. Maybe it was a leadership promotion. Maybe it was just a workshop that you went to that was hosted by nationals or something like that. A district program event, a national program. Maybe it was just a social event that you had with the band. Or maybe it was just a sisterhood event for your chapter. Regardless, you are able to pick what event it was, multiple if needed, and then you're going to give a brief overview of the event. What actually happened during that event? Then you're going to list all the supplies and total funds. So, what supplies did you need? If it was a fundraiser, you're probably going to have to get things to sell. So, what supplies did you need for that? What funds did you spend from the chapter to complete that event? And then I added, how does this event promote the ideals of Tau Beta Sigma? And then list the things that worked well with the event and the things that you would like to see change in the future. This form in no way, shape, or form dictates what your chapter has to do just because someone fills it out. If someone fills it out and says this is a great event, we should definitely do it every single year, the next person doesn't have to do that. They just have a database now of all the events that have been done in the past that they can look through and choose to make their jobs easier because they already know that the fundraiser worked. They already know what supplies to get for it. They already know around how much it's going to cost. And if there were any problems with the event, they already have those listed so they can look out and make sure that those don't happen again the next year. I would like to point out also that I added how does this event promote the ideals of Tau Beta Sigma to kind of make this form multiple use. So it is great to have a catalog of everything else, but if you'll notice on the fall activities report and things like that, one of the key things it asks from your events is how does this promote the ideals of Tau Beta Sigma? So this is also going to help fill out paperwork because you can look back and see, oh yeah, we had 3 fundraisers this year. The officer already said how it promotes the ideals of Tau Beta Sigma. I just have to copy and paste this into this paperwork and then submit it. So like I said, this is not something that you have to use. And a lot of chapters have tried to implement something like this, but haven't seen their officers kind of follow through with it and make sure they do it after every event. And you'll see that if you try to implement something new. But it is something that allows you to create a database and a catalog of your past events to make sure that everybody can look back and see them and they're easily accessible. Everyone knows what went on, everybody knows what happened, and they know that the officer either struggled with this or maybe the committee struggled with this, things of that nature. And go back here, present that, cool. So does anybody have any questions about that Google form or that resource? Like I said, you don't have to use it. It's just something that I found that was helpful. Other things that you can do before elections are seemingly what you want to do in your office. How much of your office are you showcasing to the chapter? Because everybody knows the treasurer does fundraisers, secretary takes minutes. You have duties listed in your constitution, but you can kind of share the wealth of knowledge before you ever get to elections. So another interesting concept is a leadership initiative. Some chapters have started to do this over this past year. Basically, this concept comes from if you are the sisterhood chair, let's say, and you wanted to plan sisterhood events once a month. If you had a committee or just the chapter in general, you would reach out to the chapter and give a leadership opportunity. So you're giving the opportunity for an active member or someone in your committee to kind of take the reins of the office for that one event. You will be there to support them, of course, because you are still that chair or that office, but it gives active members opportunities for growth and leadership while giving them a taste of what that office actually entails. So when I was an active member, our treasurer did this and allowed people on his committee to completely plan a fundraiser, one each semester. And then because of that, they got the full experience of being a treasurer. They planned out the fundraiser, they got all the supplies, they what is it? Reserve the location. I couldn't think of the word reserve, sorry. They reserved the location on campus that they did the fundraiser. They planned out the times, they got volunteers to work the booth. Whatever it was, that committee member, that active member was completely in charge of that office for that event. Now, I know people might have mixed feelings about this because you are kind of giving your office to someone else for a time, but it really takes a lot of stress off of that active member who maybe is interested in an office but doesn't quite know if they want to do it yet. So they have no full responsibility of the office, but they still get all that information, and they have you as a support during the entire thing. The last time I saw this happen, the person who did the actual fundraiser went on to become the next treasurer, and the knowledge transfer was almost seamless because they already knew what was expected of them. And then throughout the year, we have minutes and different reports that we look at. So every chapter meeting, you're probably giving some sort of report about how your office goes. This, in general, is a knowledge transfer. Now, you as an officer, your only duty is to give the knowledge that you have in that moment. If chapter members don't hear it or don't respond to it or take it in as knowledge transfer, then that's on the chapter members. But you as an officer are giving your reports, sharing what's happening. That is some form of knowledge transfer. So now that we've covered before elections, you're doing what you need to as an officer, sharing your minutes, giving reports throughout the year, maybe filling out the after event Google form, maybe having some sort of leadership initiative. Cat's here. What does it look like during elections? How can we structure our elections as a chapter to make sure we're having some sort of knowledge transfer? Elections in general, there should be some sort of knowledge transfer going on because there are people running for this office. Those people are hopefully doing their research of that office, knowing what needs to go into that office to prepare to run for that office. Now, every chapter does elections differently. So your chapter might just have nominations, and then they might just have a vote the next week. Your chapter might have nominations, they might do some sort of caucus, and then they vote. Everything is fine. But a great example of how elections can structure and induce knowledge transfer is to look at our districts and national leadership. So at the district level, elections are, we have people creating packets for these offices where they are creating a letter of intent, showing what they want to do, having goals for their office for the entire year, and going through some sort of interview process. This leads to knowledge transfer in a couple of different ways. First of all, everybody who's running for that office is doing some sort of research into what that office entails. They're already going to have a leg up on knowledge transfer because they've done research as to what that office is going to do. Plus, with packets, they are creating some sort of goal or plan for when they get that office if they do receive it. That plan and goal is already supplying knowledge transfer not only to the person running, but to the body that is going to be voting because they are reviewing that plan and goal. So even if 30% of your chapter is never going to do or have anything to do with the treasurer office, they are still reading a document about the goals and plan that the future treasurer has. So they are getting some of that knowledge intake that leads them to either be able to support the next person in that office or hold that person accountable. Because with knowledge transfer, yes, we want to make sure that the next officer is in a good place so that they can succeed. We also want to make sure the chapter is in a good place knowledge wise so that they can support and hold that officer accountable to what they want to do. So you can structure it that way, try out some packet, things like that, but you do not have to do that. Simply having a caucus and asking questions of the people running for these offices is still a way to have some sort of knowledge transfer. You're still getting officers, the people running for those offices, and the active membership thinking about these offices and what is entailed in them. So you're still creating some sort of knowledge transfer. And then after election. So this is the big transition. What are we actually doing after the elections happen? We spent the entire year documenting everything that we did and creating some leadership opportunities for our chapter members. Then during elections, we structured them in a way where everyone was getting the knowledge. Great. Even if we didn't, there is some sort of transfer of knowledge because people have to go through the election process. And now it's after elections. And we've said that we are going to transition seamlessly to the next officer class. We need to make sure that that actually happens. The first way that this is done, the most common way that this is done, is transition meetings. Now, chapters do this differently. Some have transition meetings right after their ceremony to install officers. You can do that. Some have, hey, we're going to give you 2 weeks. Make sure you have a transition meeting with the next officer. And some chapters go a lot more in depth than that. I personally believe that transition meetings should not just be a one and done meeting. Like, you were just installed, we're going to go have coffee and we're going to talk about it, and then we're never going to talk about any transition material ever again. I don't think that's how transition meetings should go because it's not enough information for you to be able to take on any office while being a full-time college student. So I suggest trying to have multiple different sessions for transition meetings. You can divide it up based on your office. So maybe if you are transitioning in the role of president, you have a small meeting where you talk about how to actually run a meeting. Maybe you have another transition meeting about how to fill out paperwork on Opus. Maybe you have another transition meeting about holding members accountable. Those meetings are going to cover in detail those small topics, but they're all going to build up to that one office, which is why I suggest you should have multiple. It also prevents just the new officer getting overloaded with information that they won't remember half of until they have a question about it the next year. And if you are a senior graduating, you're not going to be around to answer that question. If you did the documentation, then they might have some information to go back on, but we want to make sure that they feel comfortable from the moment they take that office. So try having multiple sections. These can be an actual meeting together. You can also just do the session as a process together. I know for most schools, whenever a new treasurer is elected, you have to kind of reconfigure the names that are listed on your account through the school. That's a process that the old and new treasurer can do together. They can go to that office together. You can show them the steps. That way they know everything that's happening there. Usually that office is the same office that you have to do check requests through or anything involving your account through the school or through the bank that your chapter goes through. So it would be very easy to actually have something in front of them where they can see this entire process from start to finish and that be one of your transition meetings. Other than transition meetings, we get a lot of knowledge transfer from our final reports and charges that we have in those reports. So some chapters I've come to learn don't actually do final reports. They just do a report at like the last meeting, but it's not like something ingrained in the chapter to do charges. I think charges are a great way to keep the next officer on track with what they need to do throughout the year. It gives them kind of a list of this is what I did throughout the year, this is what I suggest throughout the year. Charges are also something that doesn't have to be done, so it gives them a list to follow that they can deviate from if they need to. I know when I was an active member, our officers did not do charges, but I think it's extremely helpful, especially because it gives you a game plan. Even if you didn't have one already written down, your past officer has given you one that you can follow and make sure you're staying on track. So, charges, talk about them openly, talk about them during your transition meeting. If you are transitioning and you have multiple meetings, Talk about why you put those charges in place. Those charges were not just something you thought of randomly. You have a year of experience, which is why you wrote them. So talk about them. See if they have questions about them. Committee charges can be included in this. From what I've seen in chapters, again, a lot of chapter committees don't actually do final reports and charges. I know when I was an active member, we had finance committee, membership committee. They met and they planned things, but we never actually heard from them in a chapter meeting about what their charges were or if they needed stuff from the chapter, things like that. So that effective communication comes back now with your committees because your committees do a lot of work outside of meetings that a lot of times we don't even get to see. And you want to make sure that that work is being acknowledged and that we are able to pass that work on to the next year's officers. So transition meetings, super important. Make sure everybody understands the processes, and then charges. Let people ask questions about charges, make sure they're fully explained so that they have a roadmap for the future. Overall, every chapter has some sort of system in place for transitioning to the next year's officers. Whether that system works or not, we have to make sure that we're fine tuning it and tweaking it for the future. So make sure you're using your resources. Google Drive, hopefully everyone is using it. If a chapter is not using Google Drive, we need to steer them to Google Drive because it's a great resource to make sure you have everything in one place. But make sure you're updating the information from year to year. You know that you have to submit your constitution yearly and MEP and things like that. But what about the process for reserving a location on campus? Has that changed? Is it written down anywhere? Has your chapter ever written it down? Little things like that are things that can be written down and saved in our Google Drive to make sure that everybody is getting that information, that it's not just one thing that's been said from year to year and we just kind of do it. So, all of those tiny little processes, make sure you update year to year. And then make your chapter's master guide. If there is something specific that your chapter does, think about that. Like, go back to your chapter, have a brainstorming session, and think about something specific that your chapter does. Maybe it's buying flowers for sisters after their recitals. Maybe it's having receptions after the full band has a performance. Figure out what that thing is that your chapter does, and then look in your Google Drive, look in your documents. Is there a sheet that says exactly how to do that process? If there isn't, then one needs to be made. Is there something that says this is exactly how to do this step by step? If it's not there, it needs to start the process of being made for the future. That way, anybody who comes along is going to know exactly what happened. If it isn't written down, it should be always. Anything that your chapter does that we want to see in the future, longevity wise, needs to be written down so that other people have access to it. And then on the front of using your resources, remember that you have national resources like the Chapter Operations Handbook. Obviously, you have the national website with a bunch of resources that you can use on it. It has fundraisers, things like that. But with everything in this presentation, if you start implementing some of it, you will see a catalog from your own chapter because you have those national and those district resources, but we want to make sure that our chapter also has our own resources that we can always fall back on and make sure that we're using. Okay, I'm going to open for any questions or comments. I kind of went through those last couple slides a little bit quick because I wanted to make sure there was enough time if you guys had any questions about transfer of knowledge or effective communication. So is there anything that maybe you have a question about what your chapter is doing now or what you could start to implement to see effective knowledge transfer in the future? And if you don't want to talk out loud, you can put it in the chat. I'm not seeing any questions, but I will put my email in the chat in case anybody has any questions or needs anything. I'm also going to link this Google form um, so that you guys can have access to it. The link might not work. I might have to add the sharing stuff, but I'm going to link that so that you guys have access to it. Can I stop sharing my screen? That way you can always, if you want to use it, you can edit it and then use it whatever you need. But yeah, thank you guys for listening. And if you have any questions, please make sure to reach out for my email.